The Middle East is once again on a knife's edge, witnessing a direct and dangerous military confrontation between two old rivals, Iran and Israel. For many years, these two nations have been fighting a shadow war, but now the conflict has burst out into the open. The recent escalation is not just another skirmish, it is a full-blown military exchange that threatens to pull the entire region into a much larger, more devastating war. The fighting started when Israel, on the night of June 13, 2025, launched a massive and unprecedented series of airstrikes deep inside Iranian territory. This was not a small, limited attack, but a major military operation involving dozens of advanced fighter jets and, reportedly, even special forces on the ground. The primary justification given by the Israeli government was to stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared that his country was acting to remove an existential threat. His government claimed to have intelligence that Iran was just days away from having enough fissile material to build several nuclear bombs. This dramatic claim followed a period of rising tensions, including a recent resolution from the International Atomic Energy Agency, which condemned Iran for not being fully transparent about its nuclear activities. Israel decided that diplomatic pressure was no longer enough and that direct military action was the only option left to ensure its security against a nuclear-armed Iran. The Israeli strikes were precise and targeted high-value assets. The main focus was on Iran's nuclear infrastructure, with significant damage reported at the Natanz and Isfahan facilities. In fact, the above-ground pilot enrichment plant at Natanz was said to be completely destroyed. Beyond the nuclear sites, Israel also hit the headquarters of the powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Tehran and various other military installations across the country. The operation, codenamed Operation Rising Lion, was a clear message to the Iranian leadership, demonstrating Israel's capability to strike at the very heart of their defense and nuclear establishment, a capability they had been building up for years. This move marks a historic shift in the long-standing animosity between the two nations. Previously, their conflict was fought through proxies, groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon or Hamas in Gaza. Direct state-on-state attacks were rare and carefully avoided to prevent an all-out war. However, the June 13th strikes shattered this unspoken rule. Israel's decision to directly target Iran's sovereign territory, including its most sensitive military and scientific sites, crossed a red line. It was a gamble that has now triggered a cycle of retaliation and counter-retaliation, pushing the entire Middle East into a new and frighteningly uncertain chapter where the old rules of engagement no longer apply. In response to the Israeli aggression, Iran did not wait long to unleash its own military might. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei vowed painful revenge, and the IRGC promised a response that would be more painful and more destructive. True to their word, Iran launched salvos of ballistic missiles and armed drones towards Israel, though many were intercepted by Israel's advanced air defense systems, like the Iron Dome and David's Sling, supported by American naval destroyers in the region. Some managed to get through. The night sky over Israeli cities like Jerusalem and Tel Aviv was lit up by explosions and the crisscrossing trails of interceptor missiles, bringing the reality of war directly to Israeli civilians. The Iranian attacks, though less numerous than Israel's initial assault, were designed to cause fear and demonstrate that Iran could also strike back effectively. A missile that landed in Rishon LeZion, a city south of Tel Aviv, caused significant damage and casualties. Another missile, fired by Iran's allies, the Houthi rebels in Yemen, struck the city of Hebron in the West Bank. These strikes showed that Iran's reach, combined with its network of regional proxies, could pose a serious threat to Israeli population centers. The message was clear: an attack on Iran would not go unanswered, and Israeli citizens would not be safe from retaliation. Israel, in turn, did not consider its initial operation to be the final word. It continued its campaign, launching further strikes on what it identified as more than 170 military targets across Iran. Israeli fighter jets pounded locations in and around Tehran, including the Ministry of Defense headquarters and military research facilities. The Israeli Defense Forces issued warnings in the Farsi language on social media, telling the Iranian people to stay away from military sites, a tactic aimed at minimizing civilian casualties while maximizing damage to Iran's war-making capabilities. This sustained aerial bombardment aimed to systematically dismantle Iran's military infrastructure and cripple its leadership. The conflict quickly became a deadly tit-for-tat exchange. Each strike from one side was met with a counterstrike from the other. Iran launched a second wave of missiles, and Israel responded by hitting more targets. This cycle of violence created a terrifying new normal for people in both countries. The fighting was no longer confined to distant battlefields or proxy wars. It was happening in their cities and neighborhoods. The constant threat of missile alerts and explosions became a part of daily life, as the governments of both nations seemed determined to prove their strength and resolve, no matter the cost to their own people or the stability of the region. The missile mayhem has inflicted a terrible human toll on both sides. In Iran, the Israeli strikes have reportedly killed over 128 people and wounded hundreds more. The casualties were not limited to military personnel. They included prominent figures from Iran's military and scientific communities. Among the dead were top IRGC commanders, including its chief, General Hossein Salami, and the chief of Iran's armed forces. At least 6 leading nuclear scientists were also killed, representing a devastating blow to Iran's military leadership and its scientific ambitions. For ordinary Iranians, there is widespread fear and anger, with many trying to flee major cities while others rally in patriotic support of their government. In Israel, the Iranian retaliation has also brought death and destruction. A direct missile hit on residential buildings in Bat Yam, a suburb of Tel Aviv, killed 6 people, including 2 young children. In total, at least 10 people have been killed in Israel, with dozens more injured. The wail of air raid sirens has become a constant sound, forcing families to rush to bomb shelters at a moment's notice. The Israeli government has declared a state of emergency, banning large public gatherings and instructing citizens to remain close to protected spaces. The psychological impact on civilians, especially children, is immense, as the sense of security has been shattered by the reality of missiles falling on their homes. Leaders from both nations have used strong and defiant language, showing little sign of backing down. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu referred to the Iranian strikes as the premeditated murder of civilians and promised that Iran would pay a very heavy price. He has framed the conflict as a necessary war for Israel's survival. On the other side, Iran's new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, has been equally resolute, stating that Iran will not stop its uranium enrichment program and vowing to rebuild any facility that Israel destroys. The Iranian foreign minister asserted his country's right to self-defense, insisting that Israel must be the one to stop its attacks, reflecting a position of unyielding defiance. This war of words is just as intense as the military conflict itself. Both governments are trying to rally their populations and project an image of strength to the international community. In Iran, state media is downplaying the extent of the damage from Israeli strikes while highlighting the impact of its own retaliation. In Israel, the government is showcasing the effectiveness of its air defenses while stressing the threat posed by Iran. For the people caught in the middle, these powerful speeches and declarations offer little comfort. They are the ones living with the daily fear, the loss of loved ones, and the destruction of their communities, paying the ultimate price for the decisions of their leaders. The escalating conflict between Iran and Israel has sent shockwaves across the globe, with international leaders and organizations urgently calling for a halt to the violence. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session, where nations like Russia, as well as regional powers such as Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, condemned the attacks and pleaded for restraint. The European Union has also voiced its deep concern, fearing that the fighting could spiral into a regional war with catastrophic consequences. The world is watching with bated breath, worried that this direct confrontation could ignite a wider conflict that no one can control. Major world powers are reacting with alarm. The United States, while supporting Israel's right to defend itself and even assisting in intercepting Iranian missiles, has tried to distance itself from direct involvement in the Israeli offensive. President Trump has stated he sought to prevent the escalation, yet his administration's support for Israel remains firm. Meanwhile, countries like the United Kingdom and the United States have issued strict travel advisories, warning their citizens against all travel to Israel and urging Americans in Iran to leave immediately. Diplomatic missions in the region are on high alert, with some countries evacuating non-essential staff and their families, a clear sign of how seriously they view the threat of a broader war. The economic impact is already being felt far beyond the Middle East. Global oil prices surged dramatically following the news of the strikes, as markets feared a disruption to the flow of oil through the critical Strait of Hormuz, a key artery for global energy supplies. Stock markets around the world tumbled, with major indices like the S&P 500 and the Dow falling as investors grew anxious about the geopolitical instability. This economic fallout is a stark reminder of how interconnected our world is and how a conflict in one region can affect the livelihoods of people thousands of miles away, from the price of petrol at the pump to the value of their retirement savings. Ultimately, this conflict underscores the fragile nature of peace in the Middle East and the urgent need for de-escalation. Every missile fired and every life lost makes a peaceful resolution harder to achieve. The danger is not just a war between Iran and Israel, but a regional catastrophe that could draw in other countries and have devastating humanitarian, economic, and political consequences for the entire world. The international community's calls for calm are not just diplomatic formalities. They are a desperate plea to pull back from the brink before it is too late. For everyone's sake, a path to dialogue and peace must be found, because the alternative is simply too terrible to contemplate.